I'm a champion of whole child education. That third grader needs more than academic supports because you can wrap that third grader around with all kinds of academic supports, but if you can't get at the trauma, if you can't get at the connections to neighborhood violence or domestic violence that they're experiencing, that kid is going to struggle academically.
Welcome back to Unlock 360, the podcast about leadership, teaching, and learning. I'm your host, Wendy York Davoud. Joining us today is Dr. Jeffrey Hunt, a dear friend and former colleague of mine. So, Jeff, from the work that you did at Agape Charters as an assistant superintendent to now working for the Fresno County Office of Education and, of course, originally serving as a classroom teacher, what drives you to do this work? It's hard. So why do you do it?
My work at Agape was really near and dear to my heart because it was established in the community where I was born and raised. And in that community, I kind of flashed back to my elementary school years and, third, fourth, fifth grade, when I started seeing my peers as young as fifth and sixth grade drop out of school and get involved with substance abuse and get involved with trafficking and some of those things. And so I lost a lot of my peers as I matriculated through school, fifth grade, sixth grade,
You did?
seventh
I did not
grade.
know this.
Yeah, and I just reflected on this just like in the last couple of years. I was like, oh my gosh, I'll just share a quick story. So I played on a community Pop Warner football team in eighth grade, and there were about 30 of us boys. And I looked back at that picture, Wendy, and the horrific stories that picture told between 4 or 5 of those boys no longer with us, like having passed away in their teenage years from gang violence, some of them incarcerated. And to the extent that I know them all, like maybe 2, including myself, were college graduates. And so I didn't realize it back then, but that's really my why. Like, how many of those boys, had our schools been in place to support them with mental health and with other things that they needed, how many more of those boys would have graduated high school or would have lived or would have not been incarcerated? And I literally just had that epiphany. I mean, I have several other whys, but literally had that epiphany not long ago where it's like, oh my gosh, had some of the services that schools are just now dreaming about been in place, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, how many more of those boys, right? Boys of color, right? Black boys, Latino boys, how many of those boys would have been better off? And it was, as I was growing up, it was the parents were scapegoated. It was about, the parents should have known better, or the parents failed at raising them. And in some sectors, that is still that is still a scapegoat. Well, the children are a product of their parents, or children are a product of their environment. And I ask myself, do they have to be, right? Do they have to there's a biblical passage that asks, do the children perish because of the sins of the fathers, right? So do they have to fail because their parents had rough lives? Do they have to be in the school to prison pipeline because their dads are in prison or because their moms are incarcerated? And my answer to that is no. Right. And this is why we do this work. And this is why our schools need services and partners to address some of these needs. Because some teacher, right, like tried to sit that third grader down who had all kinds of community challenges and home challenges. Some third grade teacher tried to sit that kid down and have them do a 5 a day and have them dig into books and whatnot. And that kid could not engage that curriculum. And that kid was sent out of class. And that kid was, you know,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
ultimate. I'm sorry. I,
I cannot believe after 15 years you've never shared that with me. I didn't know this.
it's so fresh. Like it's something I literally just reflected on. I was sharing with a college class not long ago. It was an African American Studies class. I was sharing my story, and
I
it was
talked to you on the way to that
that.
class.
Yes, you did. That literally that day, we a half hour before that class, we talked, and I had not prepped that, and all I intended to talk about was my neighborhood. And when I talked to that class, that picture came back to me, like that picture us of us eighth grade boys who played on that community football team. That picture came back to my mind vividly, and I just like scrolled through that picture and did a roll call, and I was like, oh my God, this person passed away. This person dropped out of high school in ninth grade. This person, who knows where they are. This person, I saw strung out behind my office walking the streets, like, and we literally were close friends in elementary and middle school. And it was not like, I mean, my parents did a great job with me, but their parents tried to do great jobs with them. And there were just other dynamics that they weren't protected from, like I may have been. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not all grit, right? It's not all law of averages. I feel like those are scapegoats. I feel like we, as schools, can do better in connecting our kids with services to address needs earlier.
We can do better. We absolutely can do better. And that's just, it's heartbreaking. I mean, that story just, oh, I mean, you're so young to have that many people that you knew that played with gone or in dire straits, or just really, really struggling. It's so heartbreaking. And you don't have to apologize, by the way, because that's just real. That is what it is. And it was planted because they know that I'm a crier, so they thought it would be cute to see. um, anyway, I mean, that's powerful. And we can do better. We have to do better. We have to do better.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm a champion, Wendy, of whole child education. Like that's what I mean when in talking to the producers about whole child education, that's what I mean. Because I'll go back to that third grader. That third grader needs more than a 5 a day and RTI. That third grader needs more than academic supports, because if you can wrap that third grader around with all kinds of academic supports, but if you can't get at the trauma, if you can't get at the connections to neighborhood violence or domestic violence that they're experiencing, or other adverse childhood experiences, if you can't get to their reactions to those experiences in your classroom, that kid is going to struggle academically.
Yeah, and we really do have a lot of work to do in terms of equity in that area.
In disaggregating data, I looked at one of our local high schools here in the Fresno area as I was working with some of the counselors there. And the outward facing dashboard data, California dashboard data, clumps students by racial ethnic groups. So I was looking at this school was predominantly Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx. And the school was really proud of their outcomes with Latinx students. And I challenged that school to, in their internal systems, to disaggregate that data between male and female students. Well, once they did that pretty simple analysis, they realized that Latinx females were pulling big time, pulling the averages up because they were flying high. They were outperforming other student groups. So it was the Latinx females. What they found was that the Latinx males had like a dropout rate that was double the average of the school. They had graduation rates that were like significantly lower. And that school had never, when you talk about equity, that school looked at their Latinx student group and thought, oh, wow, we're winning. But just one other level of disaggregation, and they realized, wow, our Latinx boys are struggling. Latinx girls they're heading off to college and doing amazing things, but the boys, and so I like really have a passion about our boys of color. They are the ones that fill California prisons, our Latinx boys and our African American boys. And within those same student groups, the girls are kicking butt, pretty resilient, but we can even still do better providing supports to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do see that so often in the data. And it's true. The system that is in place at the state level in California particularly doesn't get to the male or female piece. And I'm guessing that may lead you to the kind of the next part we were going to discuss, and that's, what are some of the resources that districts need in order to address the whole child?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So in California, they just in the last year or two funded community schools and this concept of community schools. And what this concept entails is the state finally realizing that the schools can't do it by themselves. So you've got schools now working with mental health providers. You have schools now working with community-based health centers. Schools are working with churches now. Go figure, right? Churches partnering with schools to help meet the needs of kids. You have schools partnering with other community-based organizations to try to get at the dynamics I was talking about that I experienced as a child, right? We're finally learning that schools can't do it alone, and we're learning that, you know what, children don't have to suffer because of the lack of resources or lack of skills of their parent. We can fill some of those gaps with community organizations and community supports. I'll use an example. In my own experience, I have a lot of friends who see kids out of school walking down the street and see kids misbehaving, and they wonder, like, wow, how can I support schools? How can I help that school provide support for that kid? And until now, schools really didn't have an answer for how community members could support them. Like, if I were to walk into my neighborhood elementary school and say, hey, I just want to do something to help kids, like, schools could not envision how that person could help. They could ask him to support a fundraiser once upon a time. They could ask them to donate money or something, but a school could not envision how a minister could help that school, could not envision how a local bakery owner could help that school. I could not envision how a retired psychologist could help that school. And now with the community schools initiatives, we're starting to envision how can a retired farmer help elementary kids establish urban gardens, right? How can the local grocery store help teach kids about entrepreneurship, being entrepreneurs and business owners? And so we're starting finally to envision that, but we've got a long way to go. We as educators have tried to operate in silos for a long time. And even within our buildings, we operated in silos, and we built these gigantic walls around our school to keep the community out. And all along, the community is saying, we're here, we want to help, we just don't know how.
Okay, I want to speak to this just a little bit and give you, or share with you, if I may, a boots on the ground perspective. Just a different perspective, just something to be aware of, maybe. And this may not be news for you. So in our work with schools and districts that are starting to talk about this, that are starting to put these resources in place, they need help with the why and the how. Because what we're hearing is, I attended this district meeting and now I'm being told as a site principal that we're going to be a community school. I don't have time for this. And they're telling me that it's nothing new. They're telling me that it won't be any more, not nothing new, that it won't be any more work for me. They're telling me that's not true. It's going to be, if you're the leader of a school, there are going to be additional layers to the work that you do as you transition to becoming a community school. And so while I agree that kids deserve access to resources and we should be partnering with and leveraging our community and putting these resources in place, what we're hearing is in multiple counties is our county office is pushing this. We're being told we need to do this. How? Like, when and how am I ever going to get this done? I don't have time to add this whole big initiative to my plate. So and again, maybe you're probably already aware, maybe hearing some of that yourself, some of the buzz that's out there. What are your thoughts?
So absolutely. And schools do, I've seen this in my years, schools do experience initiative overload. And every initiative that is brought into schools has the same message that says this is not a new initiative. Just this is right, like that, because you have to say that it's not a new initiative to try to penetrate that affective filter. The idea of community schools is a little different in that my experience in charter schools has really gave me an open mind to the idea of community schools. Charter schools are innately dependent on parents and community members to want them to be around as they are renewed every 5 years. So charter schools had to, in their founding, have community partners who would support their presence in the neighborhood, community partners who would support their students with different things depending on the needs that charter school sought to meet. The idea of community schools and that whole child approach is leverage the will of community members to benefit your school. You're not going out and recruiting community members to convince them to want to support your school. You're opening the door to community members to do what they've always wanted to do. The work that falls on the school leader may involve coordinating some of those efforts but it's almost like guiding a race, like guiding a a force that wants to be in your school. You're not like fishing for support. You're actually helping to guide the support that wants to be in your school. Helping that church who wants to like help tutor kids or provide after school resources for kids. You're helping that church understand the boundaries between church and state, helping that other faith-based organization realize that yes, you can support our schools and not run into any church and state issues that we may have.
Remember to check out the description below to learn more about LTL 360, Dr. Jeffrey Hunt, and Fresno County Office of Education. Jeff, what is student voice and why does it matter?
So student voice became another passion of mine in the last several years as I realized that as we were seeking to improve schools, really in my executive leadership coaching days, as we were strategizing to improve schools, I realized that there were a bunch of 40-year-olds sitting around a table making decisions about 15-year-olds without a 15-year-old in the room. We were making decisions about what would make a 15-year-old feel safe, what would make a 15-year-old want to engage in school, what would make a 15-year-old interested in the extracurricular activities that we had on our menu of extracurricular activities. And so us 40-year-olds were sitting around that table trying to guess what a 15-year-old would want, would need without a 15-year-old at the table.
Yeah.
And I asked the principal, in another scenario, I was helping a school they had this outbreak of fights on their campus. And again, 40-year-olds sitting around the table trying to figure out why freshman kids were fighting. And so then I began asking questions. Well, who's fight? Is it girls fighting or boys fighting? And they didn't know. And why are kids fighting? They didn't know. And so working with that school leader, we really quickly put together a
When are they fighting?
item. Yeah, well, when are they
Didn't
fighting,
know.
right? Like, and so like we put together like a 10-question survey and attached it to a QR code, pushed it out to the schools, and within 48 hours, you had several hundred responses from kids who said there are a group of ninth grade girls coming onto the high school campus from middle school, and they want to make their presence known. And we're like, oh, wow, you've got a group of kids who are new to the high school who want a sense of belonging, and their way of creating that sense of belonging was to go after the 10th grade girls and go after the 11th grade girls, and make their presence known on campus. Well, that data was mind blowing to those school leaders, and so we decided let's work with that. We took that data, pulled a focus group of 10th grade girls, about 8 10th grade girls, asked them a few questions. Pulled a focus group of 9th grade girls, asked them a few questions, and learned that the 9th grade girls felt like, hey, we were getting picked on when we got on this campus, so we felt like we had to fight back. So then, again, student voice, right? 40-year-olds didn't know that. So from that, we worked with the middle school principal in that small district and said, hey, why don't we take our 8th grade students and two or three times a year, bring them to the high school, make them feel like, hey, this is your high school. You're going to be a part of this high school. Let them walk the classrooms. Let them come to a pep rally so that they don't feel the need to come onto this campus and flex their muscles when school starts.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a survey that near the end of my of the part of my career that was like classroom teaching, was my primary role. I started to give a survey to my students and ask them, "Do you feel safe in my class? Do you like my class? Are you engaged in my class?" And it's hard. It's hard feedback to get sometimes, but you need that from them. You need to know. And by the way, what else should I be asking you that I'm not asking you? And how can I be a better teacher for you? How often are students asked that? Unfortunately, not nearly often enough. And then you're also reminding me of a recent experience with a school site leadership team at a comprehensive high school that is trying to really focus their efforts on getting kids to start talking and being engaged more verbally in their learning, since they saw a real change in that from the pandemic, because kids were used to being muted. So they were taught to stop talking, or we're not listening even if you are. So, I'm on mute, you're on mute, that whole thing, right? So they quit talking in the class, and they were seeing that across their classrooms. We can't get them to talk. So they've been really working on how do we engage students in structured, collaborative academic conversations about what they're learning across all content areas. And how do you measure that? Well, we need to go watch. Let's go watch. Let's go listen. How else can we measure it? Because we're always looking for what else, because just one thing isn't enough. So let's ask them. And we gave it was their work. I sometimes insert myself in, and because I'm so proud, but they decided, okay, let's build a survey and let's ask the kids. And so attached a QR code, administered it. It was optional. They had 90% of the students want to give feedback and share what they thought. And then part of that survey was also, would you want to be interviewed to share more about your learning experiences here at our high school? And another 75% of the kids said, yeah, we want you to interview. So now we're going to get another data set, and that's the one-on-one interviews with the students, to find out, what they need to be more involved and engaged in the classroom. So that's all been really exciting work, and definitely a way that has brought in student voice for this particular school.
Yeah, so that's awesome, Wendy. And that experience had made me realize, oh my gosh, we're trying to produce services as schools for a client without consulting our client. And there is no other business in this world that actually is successful that tries to create solutions for clients without consulting their clients. Our iPhones, our furniture, our cars that we drive, all of these producers consult their clients and respond to their clients' needs, or else their clients will stop purchasing their product. Well, with schools, our clients kind of don't have a choice but to consume what we're offering them. And I feel like we've kind of taken that for granted. Charter schools help, and other school choice initiatives help, but as a sector in education, we do take for granted that our client has to take what we're giving. And I just feel like that's inequitable. I feel like that's unjust. And I feel like we can do better as a sector as far as creating environments where our clients or our students drive our moves.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. If there was one thing you could change about education, what would it be?
I think it would be student voice. I think having more students at the decision-making tables would be the biggest change and most impactful change that can be made.
Okay. And what are you excited about for the future of your work with Fresno County Office of Education?
I'm excited because I work in I work in the charter sector, which is kind of a niche sector of education. And I'm excited about some of the innovation that I see coming out of small schools that aren't as institutionalized as some of our larger schools. they're able to pivot when things aren't going well. They have to appeal to their consumer because their consumers have choice, and they have to appeal to those families. Additionally, they have to produce academic outcomes to stay around. So there's all of those pressures on them, and many of them are responding to those pressures. And the beauty of it as it relates to the larger sector is they're providing examples how to pivot when you need to pivot, be creative when you need to be creative, and stay the course when you need to stay the course. So I'm excited about what's happening in some of our smaller schools here in California.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your personal experience, your passion, and your expertise. It's just been an honor. Appreciate you, my friend.
Absolutely, Wendy. Can't wait to see you.
Yeah, see you soon. For our listeners, thank you for joining us today on Unlock 360, the podcast about leadership, teaching, and learning. Please remember to like, comment, or subscribe, and check out the links and information in the description below to learn more about who we are and what we do.